we're talking about citizen action, and I was saying at the start, I feel like this is sort of single-handedly one of the most important parts of the whole conversation around sustainability at the moment, and that's the role that the citizen and not just the consumer can really, really play to drive all of this forward. And obviously tonight, Monday, we are following Fashion Revolution Week from last week. So it feels like a really opportune time to kind of round up a lot of the things that we've been discussing. And also this is like, as you said, it's been a year since we started doing these roundtable discussions and indeed doing the Instagram lives off the back of them. And we've had so many conversations over this past year that have touched on this subject, and obviously much broader within this whole movement. So obviously we've done ones around social and climate justice, which have been so pivotal, but also around brand purpose and the role that the brands play in this whole landscape. All of those are on our IGTV and also on our YouTube, so you can watch some of them back. Otherwise, you can also find them on the Insights page on fashmash.co.uk. Tons of other ones on there around sustainable storytelling, scaling circularity, and all sorts more. So yeah, this conversation tonight feels like a really important one, but also a really timely one. So I'm looking forward to jumping in with you.
Me too. And I'm delighted to see that Birdsong have joined. So we're going to be having our second ever IG room later on this evening with Sophie, the co-founder, joining us. But first, I just wanted to say a very big thank you to our sponsor, Klaviyo. They've been sponsoring us for nearly a year now, and they are an e-commerce marketing company for brands of all types, shapes and sizes, from Hummingbird Bakery to 111 Skin. We have moved our e-marketing, or rather our emailer marketing, over to their platform, and we have been absolutely delighted with how it's going. We're able to really precisely target, we've got access to great insights, and we have a really helpful team of people who can help us with everything from design to database. So if you would like to give them a free trial, and we highly recommend that you do, just go to klaviyo.com/fashmash. That's KLAVIYO.com/FashMash.
What have you been looking at?
So mine, I mean, there was so much, as you were just saying, Rachel, because it's been Fashion Revolution Week. But mine was, it's a new short film that was released on Saturday by Andrew Morgan, who was obviously the director behind True Cost, the movie, which I'm sure most of you have seen, and also from Livia Firth, the co-founder and creative director of EcoAge. Now, it was released on the anniversary 8 years since the Rana Plaza disaster, which killed 1,138 people. And actually, we're going to be touching on that quite a lot. It's a bit of a thread through this conversation because it was such an impactful moment for the industry. Please, it is a 12-minute film. It's linked in our FashMash stories. It's linked in my stories right now as a swipe up. Just watch it. It takes such a short amount of time, but it had such an impact on me. I watched it twice. And really what it focuses on is the plight of the garment worker and the disparity, which so many brands are hiding behind, of this hard to define living wage, which really, as it demonstrates so amply, it should not be hard to define at all. It brings together the voices of everyone from activists to change makers to lawyers, including Falconer actor, who Rachel and I have often spoken about on our focus sessions before. In essence, for the first time ever, the global fashion industry have an opportunity to make a coordinated, structured challenge through international law. That is because the Lawyers' Circle have proposed to the EU legislation on the living wage. So really, this is a massive moment. You know, brands can no longer say, we're trying, we've got targets. No, they either need to back that law or not. And it really is that black and white. So please all go and watch it. And I'm going to leave you with a little quote that really impacted me. It's from Jessica Seymour, who is QC, a human rights lawyer. And she said, I challenge CEOs to face the human being living in relentless poverty and make the argument that they cannot have a living wage. And when she said that, it really conjured up for me that vision of a CEO trying to say it to some of the women who are in this documentary. And yeah, wouldn't stand
it really humanizes it, doesn't
exactly. It really, really does.
Yeah, thank you, Rosanna. I mean, I must admit I haven't watched it yet, but I know you have been so inspired by it. So it's my plan to do so immediately following this conversation this evening, because I have been intending to. So thank you. My inspiration this month has really just come from diving into the Albert Elbaz archive, which I spent so much time doing last night, just trying to celebrate his life after we obviously sadly lost him to COVID this past weekend. And there have been so many wonderful, very fitting, beautiful tributes to him across the media, across the press, just even looking at everybody's Instagram posts of people that knew him, just really touching. Imran from the Business of Fashion ran a Clubhouse conversation live yesterday, which just immediately had people sort of sharing their thoughts and memories, and it was just really touching and really wonderful to listen into. And I just wanted to share one quote that came from Sarah Moa about him on Vogue. And I just thought it was really nicely written. She said, "Of all the designers in today's world, Alba was the one whose entire creative modus operandi was based on the warmth of his emotional intelligence and empathy, his ability to see through the nonsenses of fashion and to liberate women from them, to see us as friends. Whether you knew him or not, his thoughtful, witty, insightful character, his honest, spontaneous, metaphor-strewn way of lighting up every conversation made every listener feel they were in a two-way personal relationship with him. We're not here to transform women, we're here to hug them," he recently said. And that, it just like totally sent shivers down my spine. It's just, I mean, Sarah writes so beautifully anyway. I never had the pleasure of meeting Albert. I don't know if you did, but
no, I didn't.
Just really thought it was a very touching time and a really sad moment for the industry to lose somebody that was just so phenomenally creative. And so celebrating him by diving into his archive, that's my inspiration this month.
And also on the cusp of doing something really new.
Yeah.
You know, he just pivoted into a really interesting new way of creating fashion, as we saw a month ago at Paris Fashion Month. I mean, it all merges into what Sarah said, but really sad, and rest in peace.
Indeed. I think just to say one more thing, I think because of what he was just launching, I think he's a really nice one for us to remember in all of our conversations around sustainability, actually, around the sort of joy and creativity that comes with fashion and how pivotal and important that is in all of our discussions, whether it's, you know, one end of the conversation that's around living wage and social justice and all the anti-racism conversations and how critical and important it is that we figure that out. And at the other end, it's obviously everything to do with anything and everything, really, you know, even the sort of capitalism and sort of new socio-economic models that we talk about, you know, those conversations as well, obviously all of them interrelated. There's that underlining piece that I think Albert so wonderfully sort of connected us on, which was just a love and creativity of fashion. And I think there's something in that to remember as we're working through all of these pieces. So I just wanted to say that.
So we marked Fashion Revolution Week this year in two ways. It was really important to us to mark it both via our speaker series, where we had Aisha Barenblatt, the brains behind the Pay Up campaign, and also obviously the CEO and founder of Remake. She spoke to us last week about centering justice in the fashion supply chain, and you absolutely must listen to that. It's on our YouTube and on our, well, it's linked on our Instagram. But then we also had our round table. So that was an intimate discussion where we joined together members of FashMash to discuss this topic. And it was dedicated really to exploring the idea of the active citizen and how they're helping shape the future of fashion, which, as I said at the very beginning, is what we're all about. We touched on diversity and inclusion through to sustainability and beyond. Our goal was to think about what will drive great advocacy in this space. Fashion Revolution Week, for those who aren't fully informed about it, might not know how long it's been established, etc. So it is an opportunity to really take a moment to create a better fashion industry and bring everyone together with that aim. It takes place once a year around the anniversary. Anniversary is kind of a difficult word in this time, but of the Rana Plaza disaster that I mentioned earlier. It's 8 years since that happened this year in 2021. And the week was titled Rights, Relationships and Revolution. It focused on the interconnectedness of human rights and the rights of the planet, a topic which I'm sure many of you will have listened to Rachel actually interviewing Bandana Tawari, the activist, on our speaker series last year. The interconnection of everything became a really important topic. Well, it came to the fore of sustainability last year in particular. This roundtable that we hosted also coincided with Earth Day. I don't know about you, Rachel, but I was struck this year with a lot of activations from brands that actually had true integrity behind them. So I'm just going to run through a few personal favorites, and these were either to mark Fashion Revolution Week or to mark Earth Day, but there was this kind of brilliant coincidence of lots of really great ideas, I think, here. So the first one, actually, I'm going to begin with Birdsong because Sophie is going to be joining us shortly, and she'll be able to tell us more about it. But just in essence, they released an Ideas for a New Fashion Industry manifesto. It was shared daily on their Instagram Live. And I think you can go and watch any of the episodes on their IGTV. It's all available at Birdsong London. And it was a manifesto for structural change in the industry and practical demands. It was aiming to help journalists cut through the greenwash and to look at radical ideas for transforming the industry. I really like that idea because also it's focusing on something bigger than just the brand. And I think far too often Earth Day, it's a moment for brands to market themselves, their product and their commercial goals. Another one which did exactly that and focused on wider industry is Allbirds. So they became really renowned when they were the first brand ever to release and label all their products with their carbon output. And on Earth Day, they open sourced their carbon calculator. It's available to all at freethefootprint.com. And that open source version of the calculator, obviously it was a massive investment of time, energy and money for them to do this. But they chose to release it and make it available to all because really that is a key part of their company ethos. They want to drive change in the industry and that they know being able to calculate that is going to be a key way to do so. Then other ones that caught my eye, and I'm sure they caught lots of other people's eyes too. Mulberry released a manifesto. This one was called Made to Last, and it is the brand manifesto of circular and regenerative strategies for the brand, asking a number of questions that address sustainability head on and setting out goals for the brand. Then we had Stella McCartney. She launched a capsule in support of Greenpeace's Act for the Amazon campaign. And she's also announced a series of Stella Talks, which began last week on the Stella McCartney YouTube. The first one was chaired by Alice Eady, who's a very renowned environmentalist and film director and documentary maker. So these are just a handful of many releases. And as I mentioned, I really particularly appreciated Allbirds and Birdsong, lots of birds there, because of the wider amplification of what they're doing. Because it's worth saying, and I think I've also been reflecting a lot over Earth Day of the fact that it can just be an opportunity for brands to greenwash, for influencers to greenwash, for us all to try to just tap into Earth Day as a hashtag rather than having real thought behind it. And, you know, a lot of people were saying, well, Earth Day should be every day. So is it a good moment for us to use to drive impact and make change? I interviewed Lizzie Carr, who is the founder of Planet Patrol, last week. And for her, as a huge environmentalist and activist, it is a really important moment to get that wider noise around the subject in her community and beyond that community, crucially. Rachel, what do you think about it all?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I think you're right that there were more launches this year that felt like they had integrity to them.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really positive thing, that there is that sort of momentum there. It's obviously just seeing that continue to exist in a way, as you say, that goes beyond the single day or week or month even, and more broadly. I just wanted to mention one of the most poignant campaigns I spotted last week that's really stayed with me, and it also comes from Earthrise, who you mentioned has done the work with Stella McCartney, and that was the Choose Earth movement, which is in support. It's between Choose Love and Earthrise, and it's in support of the Brazilian indigenous leaders fighting for the future of our planet. It's a a really quite amazing campaign. It notes the indigenous peoples are the real experts in environmental conservation, and that they exist in synergy with very complex ecosystems. So basically, they're the ones that really know what needs to happen and what needs to change. And it basically says that if we resource them, if we really resource those frontline defenders, as it calls them, and they're the ones obviously that put their lives at risk constantly to really try and preserve life and preserve obviously their land, then we're going to be fueling our own protection as well. And so all of the funds that are raised through this campaign go directly to 64 communities across Brazil. But importantly, this is the bit I thought that was really important, there are 9 internationally renowned Indigenous leaders who are directly in charge of the strategy of that fund. So they determine where it goes to. So it's very well thought out, a really worthy cause in the fight for climate justice. So we'll also share the link, Shedsy's already shared it here, the link to that one particularly. But as I say, I agree with you. I feel like the work spans much wider than just this past week.
Yeah.
And I think as an industry, it sort of points out the fact that we're all really aware of this now. It's just, I guess, us starting to see it happen more and more in reality, and I suppose at scale as well. I think the other thing that's really important to remember here, whilst we talk about all of these highlight moments that have come from Earth Day and indeed from Fashion Revolution Week more broadly, it's just the fact that while we keep vocalizing these sorts of efforts, because we have to, we really do still exist in an echo chamber. And that was one of the strongest takeaways from our roundtable last week, was that we're all already on that page. Probably the majority of people listening right now, and hopefully to the YouTube and IGTV after this, will also already be on that page. So we need to sort of look more broadly than that. And that's obviously, when we talk about the active citizen, is a really important part of this whole conversation. We know that driving greater uptake among citizens and ensuring a much more sort of more vibrant activist community is really crucial in this fight that we're all obviously charging forward on. But we really haven't yet reached that sort of tipping point for mass awareness. And that's one of the things we really dug into. There are stats that show us, particularly here's some stats from McKinsey that came out during COVID last year. It shows us that 2/3 of apparel shoppers in Europe, in this instance, say that limiting climate change impact is more important to them compared to before COVID. And they then applied this to fashion specifically, and 71% said they plan to keep garments for longer, and 65% intend to purchase more durable items because of consideration of those factors. So we've got that sort of insight on the one hand, but on the other, we obviously have seen all of the media headlines around those big queues outside Primark and all of the speak of revenge shopping. We obviously saw, not just in fast fashion, we saw last year in the luxury sector, Hermes had their most successful global trading day when they reopened their flagship store in China, and they made $2.7 million in a single day in one boutique, the flagship in that particular region. So, all of that is really quite mind-blowing, and sort of throws those stats up into the air a little bit in terms of, people's awareness versus people's action. And obviously there's a lot of talk around that space as well at the moment. So safe to say, within this context of talking about the active citizen, it is a little bit idealist of us to believe that we're really making progress on consumer behavior shifts. Like, possibly yes, but we do have so much more work to do to keep getting outside our own echo chamber on this. And I think central to this, and obviously what Fashion Revolution Week is all about, really is that advocacy side of things. And I know I say about it all of the time. I've said this on so many of our lives before, and I think I've definitely used it as my top of the hour inspiration point. Yeah. That Elizabeth Klein wrote a story last year for Atmos called The Twilight of the Ethical Consumer. Absolutely key to this whole conversation. This piece basically was about ethical consumerism being far less powerful in the sort of bigger fight that we're looking at here than consumer advocacy or citizen activism. And Aisha Barenblatt, who, as you said, Rosanna, we interviewed last week for Pioneers, which you can also watch on YouTube, she made this exact point. She basically said, we will see more power coming from voices that help to activate change than by just shopping differently. Yeah. She says we can't shop our way to progress, is the point of Elizabeth Klein's piece. And it was really pivotal for me. It really changed my thinking about what exactly the way that I personally consume, but also the way that, and my own personal actions, but also the way I think about the work I'm doing within the industry and within the sector. And I just want to read one piece. Elizabeth Klein writes, "The pandemic has swept away so many illusions. Our societal problems, from the climate crisis to systemic racism to economic inequality, run so deep and down to the bone that we've had no choice but to face them. For me, that's meant that I've stopped confusing my ethical PJs for social change. And I've thrown myself into figuring out how to build real political power instead." I should also say that Elizabeth is one of the original people behind the Pay Up Fashion campaign. She works closely with Aisha on that. But she asks us that we nurture our democracy and return to the progressive and strong mass movements of the past that provide a counterweight to the market's crushing power. I mean, she's so beautifully articulate in the way that she writes anyway, but I just thought there's just so much in that. And I'd love your view on it. Do you think that we can see enough of this to lead to progress? Do you think we're starting to see it already? Do you think there's an influencer point at play here?
Yeah, I reread that article today because I know it's your favorite. Has such an impactful way that it begins. The opening paragraph being like, "The pandemic hit, I bought off Amazon, and actually it's not." It was just because it's something that we all went through, and it's a really interesting piece to read and consider, because obviously fashion, commercial industry, driven by more, the novel, the new. You therefore, I think we've all been conditioned when any article about sustainability, it has been how to shop sustainably, how to buy your way into, how to, one thing that I think Aisha mentioned last week was this idea of curating the perfect sustainable wardrobe, which I'm guilty of. The number of people who ask me about that topic, or who I'm asked in press articles to talk, I'm asked to say my top 5, etc. And actually it can't have the impact that we need. What we do need is citizen activism. And along with that notion on the focus group that you mentioned, Rachel, about the this left-wing echo chamber, another point that everybody was agreed on was the idea that it faces challenge. If we're all going to try and be more active and use our voices, a big challenge is digital silencing and cancel culture. Now, it's increasingly prevalent online, and the problem with that is there is no room for consumers to be on a journey, for them to be making progress, because they are villainized if they don't know enough, whether that's by their friends, by their colleagues on social media. Okay, so I feel like many complain about cancel culture, and I don't want to take that black and white route. In many, many ways, it has such power, and it can be a really potent force for change and for shaping the future of the fashion industry. So take the Game Change Me Potent account, Diet Prada. I'm sure you all know it. And just in the last year, the things that account has achieved in terms of anti-racism, in terms of garment worker conditions, it really is so powerful. Or a recent example of call out culture, fast fashion have been recruiting left, right and centre celebrity sustainability ambassadors rather than experts in that field. And it's really hard to be an expert in the field of sustainability. I think a lot of our Dr. Helen Crowley from Caring, she mentioned that it's a hugely complex and scientific field. But these fast fashion brands, they're recruiting a celebrity who happens to have a huge social media following and a lot of PR coup. Primark did that last month, or indeed H&M recruited Game of Thrones Maisie Williams, and she has received a lot of flack for that. Cancel culture at play. I would actually say that is correct, that there should be flack received. Just a small handful of incidences that I'm just going to give here. So from conscious collections comprising tiny percentages of H&M's overall product range to conscious points, I am going to recommend my sister Venetia Lamanna's reel on this, because it is brilliant and so funny. She's got a bit of comic value, Venetia. Go check it out. And she's done a reel about the conscious points, and she plays off two characters, and the kind of innocent character goes, does that mean that H&M conscious points means that every time I use my Keep cup, H&M magically deposit a fiver into my PayPal? And then the kind of expert sustainability guru goes, no, 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 it just means that if you buy from an H&M conscious collection, you're going to get points to go back into store and buy more product. It's just more, 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 more. Go check out that reel. And, you know, this is all against a backdrop of the fact that a typical H&M Bangladeshi worker earns $21 while their chairman is worth $17.6 billion.
Yeah. Just mind-blowing. Hence watching that living wage documentary, as you say.
Exactly. And hence, you know, Maisie Williams being called out. Cancel culture at play, I would say quite rightfully there. But that's call out culture of a massive global brand. The concern for me is that when it happens amongst peers, amongst colleagues, and amongst maybe micro influencers who are trying to, you know, they might be in the lifestyle space, in the fashion space, and they're just trying to make small changes in their life and share that with their community, and they're getting called out because it's not good enough. We can't hope for them to get on board as advocates if we don't change this landscape. I really liked the recommendation of Vanessa Bullieu. She was on our focus call. She's an equity and inclusion strategic consultant, as well as very proudly a FashMash mentor. And she suggested we replace it with call-in culture, whereby people are educated with empathy. I also think one of the most effective ways to do that and to use call-in culture is just to hero and highlight the really positive things going on rather than vilifying the negative. And that's something that I think we really try to do at FashMash. Wouldn't you agree, Rachel?
Yes, totally. And I agree with you. I love that point that Vanessa made. I love the idea of being able to educate with empathy. I think it's so crucial. And I think for me, to that point, one of the most sort of pivotal points around our roundtable, or one of the biggest takeaways for me, was that social media really has cultivated this kind of this feeling that we have to, I mean, we all do it within our own, you know, our own social media feeds, and we therefore see it all over the place, and it gets criticized all the time, but it's really cultivated this art of perfection, and that doesn't leave any room for any sort of space for people to demonstrate that they're trying to learn. And I think that is so crucial within the sustainability space, you know, that everyone not only shares their own insights, but also the fact that they're on this journey and what they're discovering along the way, because in doing so, that obviously helps others. I mean, obviously this is a really challenging sort of side to all of this, because it doesn't sort of naturally fit with the culture of what social media has been and become. But I think the really key point in there is that word education. And for me, that does come back to those big brands again. And it also, you know, as well as the big influencers or even the micro influencers, you know, really, if you think about it, those are the people and the businesses that we can point to who are responsible for creating even what desire is in this sector. You know, they are the arbiters of taste, and let's not forget, they are the primary vehicle for the communication of fashion. That's how, you know, the majority of us outside of the media more widely, that is how nowadays, you know, with communications being so democratized, obviously, access fashion. And let's not forget how phenomenally powerful that marketing machine is. You know, it's huge. It's one of the biggest and strongest and best in the world when it comes to creating desire. We know how to do that. That's what these businesses are about. And I think we've got to get to a place where that's what changes, you know, where it's not just about making everything look perfect in order to sell more of that stuff, as you say, but to be transparent about what is really, really going on. And I think although that word transparency and all of these sort of broader pieces we talk about so much, we very rarely talk about this from a communication standpoint. And I think it is really crucial that those two do go hand in hand. And as I say, the same with influencers as well. I think we need a really bold approach to that. It's, you know, it's not something that there's a really easy solution for, but it's something that we need to continue exploring and trying to unpack and really think about. And I think not just in a way that ultimately pushes more product.
Yeah.
You know, more Primark as the example that you gave, or H&M as the example you gave. And I think that's, if you think about it from the influencer side of things, the way that it's operating at the moment, that they say that they're there because they're asking questions and they want to change the way this business operates, and they're really there to help them on their sustainability journey, which frankly, ultimately isn't really the end goal here for those businesses of working with them. It really is going to be about the fact that it props them up in a really good light around sustainability, and ultimately it helps them sell more product. If you look at the majority of comments under those posts announcing these influencers as their ambassadors for this, there's the sort of the one stream with all the voices you would expect that are the activists in the space that really ask those questions, and they're the names there that you would fully expect to be there. And the other half are people saying, where's your top from? Or not where's your top from, is your top from that brand? You know, in the Primark,
I really like it, I want to buy it. Yeah,
I like it and I want to buy it. And I think that's really the point here. You know, when we talk about that echo chamber and we talk about that mass awareness piece, this really highlights it. You know, that's the space we're in at the moment. So I think that those influencers have a responsibility ultimately to really help in that sense. You know, it shouldn't be by working with those brands ultimately, as that's not how we're going to drive change, but it should be around telling those stories. It should be in this space, but they don't need to have a sort of, you know, multiple zeros deal to be able to do so, which I can only imagine is absolutely the case.
And also, Rach, you saying this is just me going off piste, but like, remember 10 years ago, I don't know, Julia Roberts, the face of Armani, she never would have 1 second gone, and I'm also consulting with Giorgio about his creative direction. Like, no.
They wouldn't speak.
Yeah, exactly. She was the face of it, and that's where it stopped. And it's that nowadays, marketers and brands, they expect so much more from their, we actually, as part of the round table, kind of put out to everyone an article on Business of Fashion, the model activist. And they expect so much, a lot of brands expect a lot more from models and expect them to be able to stand for things and speak for things and be so much more than just a face. But it's interesting because really, like, a spade is a spade is a spade. I don't know if that's the right idiom, but really anyway.
They help sell stuff.
Yes.
And don't get me wrong, there are some people that work in that sector and are doing phenomenal job at educating. And I think that is really crucial. I think the other point you had to say is, like, none of what we're saying is like rocket science. No. This is really, really obvious, but we're just not seeing it properly at scale. And we keep seeing examples of these celebrities working with these brands, calling it sustainability, and it's really not doing the job. It's ultimately just helping to shift more stuff. And we know that's definitely the case. So I think it's just remembering that these are really powerful stakeholders in these games, like in this game, like they really, really are. They have the ability to change behavior, and that puts them as leaders in this space. And so there should be an onus on them to really do that in a certain way. And I think that then brings us all to about education for ourselves as well, which I think probably brings us really nicely full circle back to the fact that it's obviously been Fashion Revolution Week. And let's not forget that, you know, within this game of citizen action, that's the role that we can all play, whether it's within the industry or it's more broadly, it's about helping to educate people. And I think I wanted to end on the fact that Fashion Revolution have amazing resources for this, and that's kind of one of the most sort of critical things that they really do. They have what they call get involved guides, which are about exactly that. You know, it's how do you do citizen action? What does that even mean? Where do you begin? What can you actually take up, whether it's sending an email to somebody or you know, organizing you to an MP or whatever, organizing your own event. It's full of hints and tips and resources. It's just on the Fashion Revolution website around getting involved. So yeah, I think that's a good note to end on.
I want to tell you a little bit more about Sophie Slater, but I'm sure that her reputation precedes her for many of you. She is the co-founder of Birdsong, which is an award-winning social enterprise and a cult fashion brand for people who dress in protest. That is their little brand ethos there, which I absolutely love. She's also a marketing and PR consultant, lecturer and writer. Last week, she joined our focus. Hello, she is here right now. Hello, Sophie.
How's it going? This is exciting. I can't believe we can do like three-way Instagram live. It's really cool. I swear they didn't even have this last week.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's great. Life-changing.
Well, Sophie, we've actually already spoken so much. We spoke about your manifesto at the very beginning of this live. And I was just telling everyone a little bit about you. And I think one of the reasons that you were so brilliant on our Focus Roundtable is that you have your perspective as co-founder of a brand on this subject, but you're also a really vocal activist in this space. So we were delighted that you could join us today. And I think really, I gave kind of a top line overview, but I would love to hear from you more about your manifesto and why you were so driven to release that in this past Fashion Revolution week.
Thank you so much for having me. What an honour. I know my ears were burning when making me blush. So I think as a brand, we are quite unconventional in the fact that we never set out to create a sustainable and ethical fashion brand for the sake of being a brand. My background has always been in activism, and I worked with women's organisations. I've always done anti-austerity activism. That's actually why and how I founded Birdsong. So after a few years kind of working in women's organisations, which are chronically underfunded in the UK and globally because women don't get much funding, and working in women's services, we decided to make a fashion brand in order to help grassroots charities, community groups and women's orgs basically create another revenue stream. And that's why Birdsong came into being. So first and foremost, above being a kind of ethical, sustainable brand, we're a social enterprise. And that's our core mission, to create living wages and a route to market for women who are underserved by the fashion industry currently, or the economy in general. So the manifesto is kind of like a bigger part of that, but it was also some really specific, like hopefully not too utopian, I keep saying demands, suggestions, a little bit less pushy, based on our experience of 7 years running a social enterprise, how hard it is basically to run a brand that want to do things in the right way. And yeah, so we had 6 points, and they kind of range from having like rent control for community organisations, because living in London and being based in London, we've seen so many of our organisations that we work with fold because of rent raises and you know, increased gentrification, and tax breaks for the organisations who pay living wages, because at the minute I think someone pointed out that we materially probably pay more tax than some of the biggest tax dodging companies do, despite being tiny. We did do a little bit of a calculation. We calculated that, I think for Black Friday, we calculated that Amazon paid about 1% of their revenues in tax or something, or equivalent, and we'd paid way more proportionally, despite being a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of, you know, the size. So things like that, I guess. I mean, you know, just companies paying tax would be one, but that's already in law. We thought we were getting a little bit creative, but yeah, I guess like I felt really strongly about it because it was something. It's just these things that we keep coming up against that seem quite common sense. If you want an economy that, you know, works for everyone. But yeah.
And I love the aspect as well that you really wanted to be able to provide for press, be able to cut through the greenwashing. Can you tell us more about how you were able to do that and how you plan to continue to do that?
I think it's really hard because I do worry sometimes that, you know, we're preaching to the converted. I think, you know, a lot of our fans and customers are pretty like diehard sustainability kind of nerds. But it's really tough because obviously when we started out back in 2014, sustainability wasn't anywhere near as like cool or trendy or widely recognized as it is now. And yeah, I guess we really wanted to like spell out what sustainability means. And there's a lot of science and jargon and complex supply chains and nuance, and it is a really complicated subject. But at the end of the day, as you were saying, it comes down to, do you pay people living wages?
Yeah.
That's like the main criteria. That's the main question you need to ask a brand. And if they don't, they're not sustainable. And if they do, then good, support them. But we know that like 98% of brands don't pay living wages. And they will be the biggest ones, like most of the time. If you're shopping from a small local brand, obviously there's more control of the supply chain. We know all our makers by name. We've got personal relationships with them. Like I I'd feel awful not paying them a living wage.
Yeah,
Like,
of course.
human relationships with them, you know, like why would I do that? So yeah, I think that's the biggest question to ask, and that's why I love why you kept bringing it back to that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you're so right, and I love what you've put together. Obviously, you know, various other sort of key points within it as well. But I wanted to ask, because we've obviously talked so much here this evening about that role of education, and you guys obviously really do that as a focus of the communications that you put out. But I'd love your view on how important that part of the whole citizen action space is, as you know, a leading organisation, albeit, as you said, you know, a small one.
Ooh, interesting. I'm sorry, my brain was like unraveling a little bit. I need to think about what the actual question was. Sorry.
I'll bear it back. I just love your view on sort of how important you think education is within all of this, and are, you know, you guys are doing it, but are we seeing enough in the industry otherwise as to what needs to change when it comes to the citizen piece?
Yeah. Sorry, that's super interesting. I was like thinking down loads of little different tangents.
It's very easy to.
I think when we look at education in the space, the best people doing that in the sustainability space that I know of are Slow Factory. If you don't follow them, then absolutely do become a member. Like, they are incredible, and I think it's really interesting actually, because they did start out manufacturing pieces. I think they were making like silk scarves when I first started following them a few years back, and now they're completely concentrated on education. And I think for us, it was really interesting because we kind of had to meet our customers where they're at. And as I said, our customers are really in the know about sustainability and ethics. But as we've grown, we've decided that we do have to do a little bit more education. And it's interesting because things like made to order, for example, we switched to everything made to order in March last year, just before the pandemic hit, which was kind of either the best timing we could have done it or the worst, because people ended up waiting 6 months, but they waited, so that worked out well. But you know, we were like, oh, will people understand this? Like, we wanted to do it for a really long time, but we just didn't think people would really have the patience to understand. And I think with the whole COVID situation, with the Pay Up campaign and amazing organizations that you mentioned before, like Remake, you know, people are starting to understand. But we put out a slow shopping guide that was like, thinking about what are the decisions behind shopping, what are the benefits of shopping slowly, why it's better to do made to order, for example. And I think stuff like that like is really important for us, because it's just a way of communicating why we do things and being like, have a little bit more patience, like your dress is going to take 4 months, but that's because we don't want anyone to risk getting COVID in order to make it. And as you know, it's weird, isn't it? Because like for us, it's just communicating what we do. But I guess that comes under education, because not everyone does things the way that we do, because we don't do things in the most efficient, profitable way. We do things in the way that's going to have people be the happiest and earning the most that we can possibly do, I guess. So yeah, it sounds a bit hippy dippy when you put it like that. But I say we're tie dye, so hippie.
Perfect outfit. But no, but you're right. It's a complete rethink in terms of value sets, isn't it? And I think it's a really important part of this whole conversation, actually, when it comes to it. And it's a slightly wider one than we're having this evening. But you know, really thinking about what are we measuring here? What does success actually look like as an industry, and what are we trying to achieve? Because the shareholder primacy version is not particularly working when we look at obviously the damage that's being caused and the fact that we're not paying living wages because of that very reason. I mean, that just shouldn't legally be allowed, should it?
Absolutely. And this is why like we wanted to put the manifesto, because obviously like it's super hard to run a fashion business. It's super hard to run a social enterprise and like do things like, but it's doable. It's completely doable. You know, we're 7 years in. We always set out to say we don't want to be like ASOS. We don't want to produce on that scale or sell on that scale, because that's not sustainable for human or planetary life. But we do want to create living wages, and we want to kick up a fuss and be a blueprint for a better fashion industry. And culturally, we feel like we've added quite a lot to the conversation over the past 6-7 years, and we're really proud of that. And I think yeah, it's with a few little tweaks to policy like the ones we've outlined in our manifesto, it should be a lot easier for businesses with our values to thrive. And that's what we want really. We want to see more social enterprises, more micro brands like caring about the earth. We want to like only have, you know, with COVID and Brexit and the environmental like collapse. There's a bit probably a less depressing way of putting it. You know, there's so much opportunity to reimagine what we want fashion and our whole economic system and our whole world to look like. And we'd rather that everyone ran a small, thoughtful brand. Yeah, rather than pumping out loads of plastic into the sea and making your garment workers cry because
or worse. I just wanted to ask you, Sophie, you mentioned there around the fact that obviously your manifesto is asking for these policy tweaks, and I just wanted to bring it back to obviously the fact we're talking about the active citizen tonight and what your view is on the role that citizens can play to help drive that kind of policy change. Do you think that's possible?
Oh, it's so interesting, isn't it? I used to have a badge that said, I can't remember, it was a quote from someone, it said you have to go at it from all ways. So I think I really love that essay you were talking about, actually, about, you know, who was it that you were talking about
Elizabeth
before?
Klein.
That's the one. Yeah, that was really fantastic. But I think, again, I won't stop going on about them because they're amazing. But the Slow Factory put out a really great diagram on their Instagram this week that was like a scale of where you're at with your environmental activism.
Right,
and
yeah,
I think,
I saw
like,
it.
on one hand, yeah, you can't save the world by just shopping better. But if you have got the headspace and the money and the time, set a personal example and you've got a platform, you know, set a personal example by doing better. And I think, you know, that those are the standards that I hold myself to. I wouldn't hold everyone to those standards because they don't hang out on Instagram their whole life or, you know, preach about this stuff like I do. But for me personally, I feel like, you know, I want to buy ethically because that's in line with my values and that's, you know, what I want to do. And that doesn't make me a better person. That makes me more privileged that I've got the time and the money to think about those things. But yeah, I think you need to be engaged in all sorts of ways, and that includes writing to your MP, and it includes buying better. But it also can mean like getting involved with mutual aid networks and putting on clothes swaps or like organising like a second-hand sale for like school uniforms so that like low-income mums in your area can afford to get decent quality clothes for their kids. Or, you know, instead of putting your kids like really good school shoes they've just grown out of on eBay to get money from it, maybe like donate them locally. Just like all these little things, and seeing like the bigger picture and like where are you best placed to make like, you know, impact, and not just saying, well, it's either buying completely ethically and spending loads of money on stuff or nothing, or it's either like emailing my MP or nothing, or like, well, the party I went door knocking for the party I wanted and they didn't get in, so there's no other options. I think like there's always avenues and routes that you can have impact in, and there's so much work to be done in the world to you know, make things a little bit better. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. I think that scale of, you know, sort of where we each are on that journey, but also that view you said, I love the sound of your badge, which is that we've got to come at it from all angles for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just I think like, yeah, the phrase I always come back to, that's like my mantra for everything, is just like pessimism of intellect, optimism of will. So like knowing things are bad, knowing things aren't perfect, but always having the optimism to imagine something better and working towards that.
Love that. I've not heard that before. That's so good.
Me too. I love that. I think such a good...
but I can't remember now. It's some Marxist from the 20th century.
I was going to say, I think that's a perfect note on which to end. Sophie, thank you so much for joining us and for, as ever, actually in a really, I hate to use the word simple, but simple and succinct way, and way that feels comfortable. So I'm so pleased that we got to speak to you this evening. You bring a really, just such an insightful perspective to this discussion. Thank you.